The champagne was flowing, the candlelit tables were perfectly arranged, and my parents' closest friends were already raising their glasses in celebration of 30 years of marriage. I stood in the doorway of Milano's, the most exclusive restaurant in our city, wearing the navy dress I'd bought specifically for this moment, holding the anniversary gift I'd spent weeks choosing. That's when my brother Marcus looked up from the head table, his face going pale as he saw me standing there. "Sorry," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "You're not invited?" 47 people turned to stare at me. 47 people who had known me since I was a child, who had watched me grow up in this family, who had celebrated birthdays and holidays and graduations with me for decades. And every single one of them looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong event. My mother wouldn't even meet my eyes. My father sat there with his arms crossed, nodding approvingly as Marcus delivered the message that cut through me like a knife. My own family had planned this elaborate celebration, invited everyone who mattered to them, and deliberately excluded me. They wanted me to know I wasn't welcome. They wanted me to feel the sting of being erased from their most important moments. But here's what they didn't know about me in that moment of absolute humiliation. Here's what they couldn't have predicted as I stood there in that doorway, fighting back tears while dozens of people whispered and stared. They thought they were delivering the ultimate punishment, the final blow that would teach me my place in their hierarchy. What they didn't expect was how I turned that moment of public shame into the sweetest, most devastating revenge they could have ever imagined. What they couldn't have foreseen was that excluding me from their celebration would become the very thing that destroyed everything they thought they were celebrating. By the time I was finished with them, they would be begging me to come back to their family events. They would realize that the daughter they'd so casually discarded was the only one who truly understood how to protect what mattered most to them. And they would learn the hardest lesson of their lives, that some people, when pushed too far, don't just push back. They push everything down around you. This is the story of how my family's cruelest rejection became their ultimate downfall. My name is Natalie, and for 32 years, I believe that family meant unconditional love and acceptance. Growing up in the Morrison household should have been a blessing. We had money, status, a beautiful home in the best part of town, and parents who were respected pillars of the community. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. But perfection has a price, and in our house, that price was absolute conformity to my parents' vision of what their children should be. Marcus, my younger brother by 3 years, was the golden boy from the moment he took his first breath. Everything he did was celebrated, every achievement magnified, every mistake forgiven with a gentle laugh and a boys will be boys attitude. When he barely graduated college with a 2.5 GPA, it became a story about his social intelligence and networking skills. When he crashed his third car in 2 years, it was just evidence of how spirited and full of life he was. My sister Claire, the baby of the family, was Daddy's little princess who could do no wrong. She was the artistic one, the creative soul who needed to find herself through expensive trips to Europe and failed business ventures that my parents funded with endless patience and encouragement. When Claire dropped out of graduate school to become a travel blogger with 12 followers, it was celebrated as her following her passion. And then there was me, the oldest child who graduated summa cum laude, who worked 2 jobs to put myself through graduate school, who built a successful career in financial consulting completely on my own merit. But somehow, my achievements were always met with qualified praise. Natalie works so hard, maybe too hard. She's very driven, but she needs to learn to relax. Success is important, but family comes first. The double standard was suffocating. When Marcus borrowed $20,000 from our parents for his failed restaurant venture, it was called investing in family. When I asked for help with a down payment on my first house, I was told I needed to learn to be more self-reliant. When Claire moved back home at 28 because her latest boyfriend kicked her out, she was welcomed with open arms and her old room redecorated to make her feel supported. When I moved across the country for a promotion that would double my salary, it was seen as me abandoning the family for money. But despite all of this, despite years of feeling like the outsider in my own family, I kept trying. I kept showing up to every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering, hoping that eventually they would see me the way they saw Marcus and Claire. I kept believing that if I just proved myself enough, achieved enough, gave enough, I would finally earn the unconditional love and acceptance they seemed to give my siblings so effortlessly. The tension had been building for months before the anniversary dinner. It started when I made what my parents considered a selfish decision. I turned down Marcus's request for another loan, this time for $15,000 to start a cryptocurrency trading business he'd learned about from a YouTube video. I was tired of watching him waste money on get-rich-quick schemes while I struggled to build something real and sustainable. My parents were furious that I wouldn't support family, even though I'd already lent Marcus over $40,000 over the years that he'd never paid back. Claire sided with them, saying I was being cold and calculating for not believing in Marcus's dreams. The whole family turned it into evidence of my character flaws, my selfishness, my obsession with money, my inability to put family first. Things got worse when I started dating David, a wonderful man who happened to be divorced with 2 kids. My parents made it clear that they didn't approve of me taking on someone else's baggage, even though David was kind, successful, and made me happier than I'd ever been. They refused to invite him to family events, made snide comments about complicated relationships, and constantly asked when I was going to find someone without so much drama. But I wasn't perfect either. I'll admit that. Years of feeling like the family disappointment had made me defensive, sometimes sharp-tongued, occasionally resentful. I had a tendency to point out the hypocrisy I saw, to ask uncomfortable questions about why the rules seemed different for me than for my siblings. I wasn't always patient with their criticism, and I wasn't always gracious about their obvious favoritism. But I was loyal. God help me! I was so incredibly loyal to people who had made it clear that my loyalty would never be rewarded with the same devotion in return. When I heard about their 30th anniversary celebration through my aunt, not from my parents directly, I thought it was an oversight. Surely they wouldn't plan their most important celebration without including their eldest daughter. When I called my mother to ask about the details, she seemed flustered, saying they were keeping it small and low-key. But she never actually uninvited me, so I took that as an invitation. I bought the perfect dress, found a meaningful gift, cleared my schedule, and drove 3 hours to be there for their special night. I thought this dinner was a chance to heal the growing rift between us. I thought it was an opportunity to show them that despite our differences, despite the tension and the arguments and the disappointment on both sides, I still loved them and wanted to be part of their lives. I thought family meant that no matter how bad things got, we would always have a place at each other's tables. I was about to learn how wrong I could be. The night felt almost cinematic. Milano's was glowing that evening. Soft chandeliers spilling golden light across tables draped in ivory linens, champagne flutes filled before anyone even sat down, waiters moving with synchronized grace as though they were part of the performance. Every corner of the restaurant buzzed with laughter and conversation. It was the kind of event people dressed up for weeks in advance, the kind of celebration my parents lived for. One by one, family and family friends swept through the entrance. My mother, draped in a jeweled emerald gown, glowed as if she had been waiting for the spotlight all her life. My father wore his finest tailored suit, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, soaking in admiration like it was his birthright. Marcus and Claire floated into the room in glamorous outfits that looked like they were straight out of a magazine. Guests lined up to greet them, offering hugs, kisses, and congratulations as though they were royalty. And then there was me, standing in the doorway in my navy dress, clutching the carefully chosen gift I had wrapped with my own hands. I had come with hope, with love, with the determination that tonight would bridge the gap that had been widening between us for years. But the moment Marcus's eyes found mine, everything stopped. His expression drained of warmth, replaced by something cold and deliberate. With the arrogance only he could summon, he lifted his chin, smirked just enough for the crowd to notice, and said it loud enough to echo across the room. "Sorry, you're not invited." The words landed like stones in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't even process what he'd said. Not invited? To my own parents' anniversary? The air felt heavy, pressing against me as every single head turned. 47 people, all of them witnesses to my humiliation. Friends who had watched me grow up, family who had once held me as a child, neighbors who used to call me theirs. And now, in that single moment, every one of them looked at me like I didn't belong. The staff froze in awkward silence, unsure whether to usher me in or show me out. Guests whispered behind manicured hands. My mother kept her gaze fixed on her wine glass, refusing to look at me, as if my presence might taint her perfect evening. My father, arms folded across his chest, nodded with approval at Marcus's declaration. And there I stood, trembling inside, fighting against the sting of tears. My heart hammered against my ribs, but outwardly I forced myself to stay still, to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. Inside my head, though, the words screamed louder than anything around me. How do you become a guest at your own parents' anniversary, only to be treated like a stranger? How does a daughter get erased so cleanly, so publicly, by the very people who raised her? The answer didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was the silence that followed Marcus's words. Silence heavy enough to suffocate. Silence that told me the truth I had been avoiding my entire life. My family didn't see me as one of them. And as the waiter stepped awkwardly aside and the chatter slowly resumed, I realized something else. They thought this was the end of me. They thought this humiliation would keep me small, keep me quiet, keep me in my place. But in reality, it was only the beginning. The drive home felt longer than the 3 hours it actually was. City lights blurred past my windshield, but I barely noticed them. My hands gripped the steering wheel, so tightly my knuckles turned white, yet my body trembled uncontrollably. I could still hear Marcus's voice in my head, sharp, smug, final. "Sorry, you're not invited." It replayed over and over, each echo sharper than the last. With every repetition, the sting cut deeper, until I couldn't hold the tears back anymore. They spilled down my face faster than I could wipe them away. At red lights, I caught my own reflection in the glass of storefront windows, mascara smudged, lips trembling, a woman who had walked into her parents' celebration with hope and walked out carrying nothing but shame. I kept asking myself the same questions on a loop. Why wasn't I enough? What more could I have done? How did the daughter who worked the hardest, who showed up every time, who never stopped trying to earn their love, how did she become the one they erased in front of everyone? By the time I pulled into my driveway, my body felt drained, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I sat there in the darkness of my car, gripping the steering wheel, too exhausted to move. The gift I had bought for them sat unopened in the passenger seat, wrapped in silver paper that now felt like a cruel joke. I had spent weeks finding something meaningful, something to remind them that despite everything, I still loved them. And they hadn't even let me through the door. That's when the sobs came harder, loud, raw, the kind that shake your whole chest. I cried for the little girl inside me who had spent decades trying to earn a place at that table. I cried for the woman I had become, who had worked so hard to be strong, only to crumble at 4 simple words. And I cried for the realization that maybe I had been wrong all along, that maybe unconditional love had never existed in my family at all. But somewhere in the middle of those tears, something shifted. Somewhere between heartbreak and exhaustion, something inside me snapped. I remember sitting up straighter, wiping my face with the back of my hand, and staring at that unopened gift like it was the last remnant of my misplaced loyalty. The pain was still there, but underneath it, a new thought began to form, one sharper, colder, steadier. If they wanted me invisible, I'd show them what invisible really looks like. And in that moment, humiliation transformed into resolve. They had tried to erase me in front of the world. They had tried to make me small, voiceless, forgettable. But I wasn't going to let that be the final chapter. No, this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a hollow ache in my chest, but the tears were gone. What replaced them was something far more dangerous: quiet determination. The kind of determination that comes after you've been broken down one too many times and finally decide you're done playing the part they wrote for you. For 32 years, I had been their safety net, their emotional crutch, their financial backup plan. Whenever Marcus failed, I was there with a loan. Whenever Claire drifted, I was there with encouragement. Whenever my parents needed a scapegoat to blame for their disappointment, I took it silently, thinking that enduring it was part of what it meant to be family. But that night at Milano's had flipped a switch I didn't even know existed. They wanted me invisible. Fine. I would become invisible in the ways that mattered most. Not to myself, but to them. The first move was simple. I cut off the money. No more loans to Marcus that were never paid back. No more guilt-tripped contributions to Claire's doomed projects. No more handouts disguised as family support. I watched their calls pile up in my phone log, ignored. Their emails sat unopened, their texts unanswered. If they wanted to erase me from their family, then they would also erase every ounce of the security I had quietly provided for years. The second move was absence. For the first time in my life, I didn't show up to the next family gathering. Thanksgiving came and went. Christmas passed in silence. Birthdays, dinners, reunions, I skipped them all. And each time, I knew they were forced to explain to their glittering circle of friends why their eldest daughter wasn't at the table. I didn't need to say a word. The empty chair spoke louder than I ever could. But the third move, that was where the sting began to spread. I didn't lash out online. I didn't write angry rants or name names. Instead, I posted small, subtle truths, tiny glimpses into my life, the kind of things people outside the family never knew. A photo of the $40,000 loan agreement Marcus had signed and never repaid, framed not as bitterness, but as a lesson learned about trust. A snapshot of a thoughtful gift I had bought for my parents' anniversary, captioned, "Sometimes the people you give the most to are the ones who appreciate you the least." Nothing overt, nothing explosive, just enough for people to start asking questions. And ask they did. Slowly, the perfect image my parents had curated began to crack. Friends whispered. Extended family started to wonder. Their precious reputation, polished for decades, suddenly had hairline fractures spreading across its surface. This wasn't loud revenge. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a screaming match in public. It was calculated, silent, the kind of revenge that seeps into the cracks of your world until everything you've built feels unsteady. And it stung more than any outburst ever could, because the one thing my family cared about more than money, more than loyalty, more than even each other was their image. And I had just shown them how fragile that image really was. The morning after that dinner, something inside me felt different. I woke up in the same bed, in the same house, with the same body that had been crushed by humiliation the night before, but my heart wasn't soft anymore. The crying, the pleading, the endless cycle of trying to earn their approval, it was gone. Burned out. What was left was sharper, colder, steadier. For years, I had been the one who patched the holes in this family's perfect facade. I was the invisible glue, the dependable one, the child who carried responsibility while Marcus played, while Claire drifted, while my parents polished their reputations in public. And in return, I had been discarded like I was nothing. If they wanted me invisible, I would show them invisible. But not the way they imagined. I would erase myself not as their scapegoat, not as their ATM, not as their silent punching bag, but as their lifeline. And without me, they would slowly watch their shiny little empire rot from the inside out. The first strike was financial, because that was where they had always leaned on me most. Marcus was the golden boy. Yes, but his golden ideas always turned into dust. Failed restaurants, broken cars, half-baked investments. Every time he called, my parents expected me to write the check. For years I did. Quietly, reluctantly, out of love, out of guilt, out of hope that one day he might repay not just the money, but the respect I was owed. But now, not a cent. The next time Marcus begged for a loan, I let the phone ring until it cut off. His follow-up texts grew desperate. Just 15,000, Nat. It'll change everything this time. You know I'll pay you back. I deleted them one by one without answering. Weeks later, my mother called to scold me, her voice sharp with indignation. How could you abandon your brother when he needs you most? I didn't even bother replying. I simply blocked the number. And that silence cut deeper than any argument. The second strike was absence. For decades, I had shown up, even when I wasn't wanted. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, I came, bearing gifts, biting my tongue, pretending I was part of something I never truly belonged to. But no more. When Thanksgiving came around, I stayed home. I lit candles, poured myself a glass of wine, and cooked a small dinner for one. While they carved the turkey and posed for their staged family photos, there was an empty chair where I used to sit. And when their friends asked why their eldest daughter wasn't there, my parents had no neat little excuse to fall back on. Every skipped event became another unanswered question, another awkward silence they had to explain away. But the third strike, that was where the knife twisted. I knew what mattered most to my family. It wasn't love. It wasn't loyalty. It was image. The pristine picture they had painted for the world, the golden boy son, the whimsical daughter, the pillar of the community parents, and the hard-working eldest child who tied it all together. So I started to pull at the threads of that picture, not with screaming rants or wild accusations. No, my revenge was quieter, subtle, and that made it lethal. On social media, I posted fragments of truth, disguised as reflections. A throwback photo of Marcus with the caption, "Some debts are never financial, they're emotional." But in my case, it was both. A snapshot of the carefully wrapped anniversary gift still sitting unopened in my closet. Funny how you can spend weeks finding the perfect present, only to learn you were never welcome at the party. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. People connected the dots on their own. Cousins messaged me privately asking questions. Family friends whispered behind my parents' backs. Their perfect narrative, cultivated for decades, began to collapse under the weight of tiny truths. The effect was slow, like acid eating through metal. But the cracks began to show. Marcus's business failures were no longer hidden behind excuses. They were openly discussed. Claire's freeloading was no longer framed as finding herself. It was recognized for what it was. And my parents, those flawless pillars of society, suddenly looked like what they truly were: hypocrites who built their empire on favoritism, lies, and the exploitation of their own daughter. It wasn't loud revenge. It wasn't messy or chaotic. It was calculated, cold, brutal. Every silence, every skipped event, every subtle truth I shared online, it stung more than any screaming confrontation ever could. Because I didn't just cut myself out of their lives. I cut the supports out from under the image they treasured most. And I knew with a quiet satisfaction that the collapse had only just begun. It took months, but eventually the silence began to crush them. The unanswered calls, the empty chairs, the whispers that followed them at church, at dinner parties, in the very community they once ruled, it wore them down. For the first time in my life, they needed me more than I needed them. The message came in the form of an email late at night. Not from Marcus, not from Claire, but from my mother. The subject line was simple: "Please, Natalie." She wrote about how families fight, how words are sometimes spoken in the heat of the moment, how they regretted the misunderstanding at the anniversary dinner. She said things I had waited 32 years to hear. "You've always been an important part of this family. We want you back." But I knew better. This wasn't love. It was desperation. They weren't reaching out because they had suddenly realized my worth. They were reaching out because the consequences of losing me had finally become too heavy to bear. For a long time, I stared at the blinking cursor, debating how to respond. And then the words came easily, flowing straight from the steel that had replaced my heartbreak. "You made it clear where I stood. I just decided to stand somewhere else. No anger, no begging, no tears, just truth." And in that moment, the power shift was complete. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one knocking on the door of their approval. They were the ones knocking on mine. And I had no reason, no desire to let them in. A week later, I saw them in person. My father looked smaller somehow, his shoulders stooped, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. My mother's smile was tight, forced, as though she was performing a role she no longer believed in. Even Marcus avoided my eyes. They tried again, platitudes about family, about moving forward, about forgiveness. And I listened. I stood there calmly, arms crossed, letting them twist in their own unease. For once, I didn't rush to fill the silence, to patch the wound, to smooth things over. I let them feel the weight of everything they had thrown at me, the rejection, the humiliation, the years of favoritism and dismissal. When my mother finally whispered, "So, what do you want from us?" I smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally learned her own worth. "I don't want anything," I said. "Not anymore." And then I turned and I walked away. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic exits, just the sound of my heels clicking against the floor as I left them behind. That was the revenge. Not burning their house down, not destroying their finances, not airing every dirty secret in public. The revenge was this: I no longer needed them. And nothing unsettles people who thrive on control more than realizing their power over you is gone. I left them to stew in the silence they had created, left them to taste the same emptiness they had once served me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel erased. I felt free. Looking back now, I can admit it, the exclusion hurt. It cut deeper than anything else my family had ever done. To stand in that doorway, to be told I wasn't welcome, to feel every eye on me as if I were a stranger, it was a wound I thought would never heal. But in time, I realized that pain had given me something I never expected: freedom. Freedom from begging for scraps of affection. Freedom from carrying the weight of everyone else's failures. Freedom from measuring my worth against a family that never truly saw me. Being cast out forced me to see the truth. Family isn't defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who respects your presence, who values your effort, who chooses you, not because they have to, but because they want to. And in that silence I created, in every ignored call, every empty chair, every subtle truth I shared, I found my revenge. Not revenge in the form of screaming or breaking them down, but revenge in the form of independence. Revenge in proving that I didn't need them the way they assumed I always would. The sweetest victory wasn't in watching their image crack. It wasn't even in seeing them reach out too late. It was in knowing that their rejection no longer had the power to break me. Because in the end, I didn't just walk away from them. I walked toward myself. And that was it. The final chapter of a story that began with humiliation and ended with freedom. My family thought they had won the night they told me I wasn't invited. They thought they had written me out of their story. But in the end, I was the one who chose to walk away, and that choice was more powerful than any seat at their table could ever be. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't crashing the dinner. It isn't shouting across a room or forcing your way in. Sometimes, the best revenge is letting them choke on their own empty seats, letting them explain, over and over again, why the daughter they erased no longer shows up. But I'll leave you with this. Was I right to cut ties completely? Or should I have tried to forgive? What would you have done? Walk away quietly or confront them at the table? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of revenge served cold.